It's funny what your brain chooses to remember when your world tilts sideways. For me, it was the squeak of the HR chair, one of those wobbly budget models pretending to be ergonomic. The office smelled of lemon disinfectant, the kind meant to cover up the stale air of too many polite betrayals. Across from me sat a woman in a blazer a shade too cheerful for the task at hand. Her eyes blinked with rehearsed sympathy as she slid an envelope across the table. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice soft but practiced. The words landed without ceremony, like a dull thud. Inside that envelope was my final paycheck, a severance letter, and a polite reminder that loyalty had an expiration date. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. 15 years at the company had taught me the policies better than the people reciting them. I was the one who had rewritten the scripts, who had dressed up messy numbers until they shone like promises. I knew the weight of what was being discarded, and it wasn't mine. "For the CFO's request," she added, as though it was a detail that mattered. Translation: he hadn't the courage to look me in the eye. This from the same man who once called me mission critical when investor trust was thin, and we needed more than smoke and mirrors to keep the machine running. Now I was reduced to a line item in a cost-saving initiative. "Don't worry," the HR woman said as she stood, smoothing her skirt like she was tucking me neatly out of sight. "We'll control the narrative." I smiled politely. The kind of smile you give at funerals when someone says, "She's in a better place now." They thought this was control. They thought erasing my name from the system and seating a fresh face in my chair meant I'd be forgotten by next quarter's slides. I left without fuss. No slammed doors, no raised voice. I've always believed silence unsettles people more than outrage. As I walked through the hallways, faces turned to stone. Colleagues who had sung my praises at company meetings suddenly found their coffee cups fascinating. My nameplate was already gone from the door. In its place, a strip of duct tape with the word transitioning scrawled in black Sharpie. Efficient, impersonal. Back home, I moved through the familiar rhythm of an evening. Feed the dog, microwave leftovers, pour wine that tasted faintly of iron resolve. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I set my bag on the counter, pulled my laptop out, and booted it up more out of habit than purpose. The portal flickered open, teal banner and all, exactly as it had for years. And there in the corner, bold as ever, was my admin login. Still active, still mine. They hadn't revoked my access. They hadn't even thought to check. It was a rookie mistake, one that told me exactly how much they underestimated me. They thought wiping me from the office would wipe me from the system. They forgot who built the protocols, who scheduled the distributions, who knew the skeletons tucked away in the miscellaneous expenses column. In my bottom desk drawer at the office, still locked with an old desk key, sat the real quarterly report. Not the smoothed-over fantasy the CFO adored, but the raw ledger. $48,137,026.14 in outflows, unallocated. A number that couldn't be softened with buzzwords or hidden behind euphemisms. I had carried those numbers in my head for weeks, watching them swell like a bruise. Now, sitting in my quiet apartment, I realized I didn't have to shout, didn't have to storm into the office demanding justice. All I had to do was let the numbers speak for themselves. I uploaded the file into the backup system I'd quietly maintained for years. Version 4.2RR. The one with every timestamp, every invoice, every trail of fingerprints. No edits, no disclaimers, just the truth, laid bare. I scheduled it for release at 8:59 a.m., 1 minute before the quarterly investor call began. 1 minute before the CFO could open his mouth and start spinning fiction. I closed the laptop, poured another glass of wine, and let the silence settle around me. Out the window, the city looked indifferent. Cars moved, lights blinked, lives went on. And somewhere downtown, my old office was preparing for tomorrow's performance. They thought they had erased me. They thought they had buried my work beneath fresh jargon and cheap smiles. But the truth doesn't stay buried. By morning, it would be louder than any of them could control. And for the first time that day, I felt calm. Not broken, not enraged. Just steady. Because I knew the story wasn't over. It was only waiting for the curtain to rise. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind wasn't racing with anger or panic. It was too steady for that. Instead, it was like the quiet hum of a machine you only notice when the world around it has gone silent. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about numbers, about words, about how thin the line is between trust and betrayal. By the time dawn seeped through the blinds, I was already up. I brewed my coffee black, no sugar, no cream. Just the sharp bitterness I needed to feel awake. Alive. My dog, Bailey, thumped her tail against the kitchen floor, confused by my sudden energy. I gave her breakfast, scratched her ears, then sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open in front of me. The portal was still logged in. It felt almost absurd, like leaving the keys to a vault under the doormat. The quarterly call was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, just like always. My scheduled upload sat quietly in the queue, the timestamp ticking closer. The system didn't blink, didn't warn me, didn't even register my presence as unusual. 15 years of being the one who managed it meant I had designed the alerts to look for outsiders, hackers, anomalies. Not me. Never me. I thought about the faces around that boardroom table. The CFO, who liked to smirk when he thought he'd outsmarted the market. The CEO, whose words were more polished than his understanding of the numbers he recited. Carol from Investor Relations, who once cried in a stairwell after a mislabeled chart axis nearly cost us a major account. And the interns, bright-eyed, eager, so willing to believe they were part of something meaningful. Did they know? Did they realize the ground beneath them was already cracking? Or were they too busy sipping their coffee, rehearsing phrases like momentum and strategic direction to notice? At 8:58, I refreshed the page. Everything was quiet. At 8:59, a small confirmation appeared. Report distributed. My chest loosened, not with relief, but with a sense of inevitability. The truth had been released into the bloodstream of the system. There was no taking it back. I sat back, sipping my coffee as the investor call launched on my second screen. The familiar corporate background filled the frame, the logo in the corner, the sterile blue backdrop, the carefully curated setup meant to reassure. Names populated the participant list. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Vanguard, Bridgewater. Heavy hitters, the kind who didn't tolerate surprises. Usually the calls began with small talk. A joke about travel, a mention of someone's new baby, a quick exchange of pleasantries to humanize the sterile numbers. But this time, silence. The CEO appeared on screen, lips pursed, eyes darting, waiting. The CFO's name was there too, gray bubble blinking, but he hadn't spoken. 3 minutes passed. Then the chairman's voice cut through, calm and icy. Can someone please explain why the hell our report shows 48 million in unexplained outflows? I almost stopped breathing. That was it. The question that couldn't be softened, couldn't be rephrased into something digestible. It sat there like a live wire, and no one dared to touch it. Finally, the CFO unmuted. His voice cracked, like a teenager's mid-sentence. Yes, thank you, Chairman. That particular line item refers to transitional consultant costs and, deferred initiatives associated with legacy systems integration. Even he didn't believe what he was saying. You could hear it in the hesitation, the way his words fumbled and collided. He was trying to build a parachute out of jargon while already mid-fall. Then the questions came, sharp and relentless. Which systems exactly? Asked a voice I recognized from J.P. Morgan. Was this disclosed in previous guidance? Came another, clipped and impatient. Why are these consultants unnamed in the appendix? I knew those voices. I had trained myself for years to anticipate them, to phrase answers that calmed rather than provoked. But there was no calming this. The numbers were too raw, too specific, too damning. The CFO tried again, this time reading directly from what must have been the clean version of the report, the one he'd assumed was live. But every word clashed against the truth staring back at investors from their screens. You could almost hear the frantic math happening in the background, the clicking of keyboards, analysts pulling up last quarter's notes, spreadsheets opening side by side. 5 minutes into the call, the stock ticker slipped. 3%. By 10 minutes? 6. Not a crash. Not yet. More like a car hitting black ice, sliding out of control. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. Instead, I felt the strangest sense of calm. I hadn't doctored the numbers. I hadn't manipulated a single line. all I'd done was stop protecting them. I let the truth out. And the truth did what it always does when it's been buried too long. It burned. Across the city, in their glass tower, I could imagine the chaos. Phones ringing, emails flooding, legal counsel being summoned. HR trying to draft responses while still pretending they had everything under control. And the CFO, the man who had smiled at my termination, was probably staring at the same numbers with the same sinking realization. For 15 years, I had been the one to keep the facade polished, the edges smoothed, the lies palatable. Now, I was gone. And without me, the cracks were visible to everyone. I leaned back in my chair, coffee cold, dog curled at my feet, and listened to the silence stretch across the call. Investors weren't fooled anymore. They were circling, hungry, ready to tear into the carcass of carefully curated spin. And me? I was just Miranda, sitting in a small apartment watching the empire I'd once propped up start to crumble under the weight of its own lies. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. The call ended abruptly. No polite closing remarks. No, thank you for your continued trust. Just a frozen screen and a dropped connection, like even the software wanted no part of what had just unfolded. I sat in my kitchen staring at the blank monitor, my coffee long gone cold, Bailey snoring softly at my feet. For a moment, I felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, no relief. Just the quiet weight of inevitability settling around me. The truth was out. It had left my hands the moment that confirmation pinged. Still, I opened a market feed on my phone. The stock was halted. Reason, pending material disclosure. 4 words that meant federal auditors, SEC filings, board meetings behind closed doors. Somewhere downtown, a dozen executives were already dialing lawyers. I didn't smile. I thought of Carol, who would be crying at her desk, of the junior analysts scrambling to rewrite notes they didn't understand, of the intern, bright, eager Sasha, probably wondering what storm she'd stepped into. None of them deserved this. But then again, none of them had spoken up either. The CFO had always relied on silence. He weaponized it. In meetings, when someone raised a concern, he'd let the quiet stretch until their voice trailed off, until they felt foolish. Silence had been his power. Now, it was his punishment. My phone buzzed. A private number. I let it ring out. A voicemail popped up seconds later, followed by another, then another. I didn't listen. Not yet. I wasn't ready to hear the panic bleed through the professional polish. Instead, I poured myself another coffee and went to the window. Outside, the city looked the same. Buses wheezing down the street, people rushing to work, horns blaring. No one out there knew that a company was imploding 3 miles away. By noon, the messages stacked up. My former colleagues, a few journalists I vaguely recognized, even a number I knew belonged to one of our institutional investors. I turned my phone face down on the counter. If I opened even one, I'd be pulled back into the narrative. And this time, I wasn't the fixer. Bailey nudged my leg, leash in her mouth. Grateful for the distraction, I took her outside. The autumn air was crisp, the kind that pinches your cheeks and smells faintly of wood smoke. Neighbors nodded as we passed, oblivious. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting the rhythm of Bailey's paws on the pavement settle my nerves. The world was still turning, even if theirs wasn't. Back home, I finally pressed play on one voicemail. It was Carol. Her voice was shaky, urgent. Miranda, please, if you can call me back. They're saying it was a leak, that someone breached the system. They're trying to pin it on an external attack. I know it's not true. Please, I closed my eyes. A leak. That would be their story. Blame the faceless hacker, the nameless outsider. Better than admitting their own arrogance left the door wide open. Another voicemail. This one from an investor. His tone clipped, professional but carrying an undercurrent of barely restrained fury. Ms. Torres, we're aware of your history with the company. If you have information relevant to today's disclosure, it would be in your best interest to reach out. History. That's what 15 years became. History. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because if I said anything now, they'd twist it, frame it, use it to shift blame. Number. The numbers were enough. The numbers didn't need commentary. That evening, I made myself dinner. Nothing complicated. Chicken, rice, garlic. The kind of meal you make when your hands need a task but your mind is elsewhere. I ate standing at the counter, staring at the unopened envelope from HR I'd tossed aside the night before. Final paycheck, severance. As if a check could compensate for years of cleaning up their messes, covering their lies, teaching them how to earn trust they never deserved. I slid the envelope into a drawer without opening it. It meant nothing now. Sleep came easier than I expected. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe the certainty that there was nothing more for me to do. When I woke the next morning, the sun was already spilling across the floor, and my phone was buzzing nonstop. The news had broken. Headlines filled the screen. Company faces scrutiny over unexplained $48 million outflows. CFO silent as investors demand answers. Stock plummets after report error. Error. That word made me laugh out loud, a sharp, humorless sound in my empty kitchen. It wasn't an error. It was the truth. And now it was too loud to ignore. By mid-morning, I couldn't avoid the calls any longer. A journalist from a financial outlet left a message that was less question and more invitation. We'd love to hear your perspective, given your role. Another from an old colleague was harsher. What did you do, Miranda? Do you realize what you've started? What I'd started. Number. What they had started. Years ago, when they decided numbers could be bent, twisted, disguised. When they believed loyalty could be bought with praise one day and discarded the next. I made myself another coffee and sat at the table. The truth was out. The cracks had widened. The board would scramble, the CFO would sweat, the investors would circle like sharks. And me? I wasn't part of it anymore. I wasn't their fixer, their shield, their storyteller. The following days blurred into a strange routine. Coffee, walks with Bailey, reading headlines that seemed to grow darker by the hour. Every time I opened my phone, there was another article dissecting the company's implosion. Words like fraud, audit, and shareholder revolt appeared with unsettling frequency. The stock hadn't just slipped anymore. It had cratered. Investors weren't just angry. They were furious. But the part that surprised me most was how quickly people tried to rewrite the story. The company released a statement claiming they had identified a system error leading to premature disclosure of incomplete data. A system error. As if numbers had minds of their own and had simply chosen to leap onto investor screens. I almost admired the attempt. Almost. But the investors weren't buying it. Calls for an independent investigation grew louder, and the board, those polished, untouchable figures I used to watch from the sidelines, were suddenly being named in the same sentences as subpoenas. My phone never stopped buzzing. Some messages were desperate, others were angry, and a few were quietly threatening. One night, close to midnight, I picked up a call from a number I didn't recognize. I shouldn't have, but exhaustion had dulled my caution. Miranda? The voice was low, male, urgent. You don't know me, but I represent a group of institutional stakeholders. We need to meet, face to face. I think you've got the wrong person, I said flatly. No, we don't. A pause then. You know exactly what those numbers mean. And so do we. If you're smart, you'll tell us everything. Before they try to make you disappear, the line went dead. I sat there in the dark, phone still pressed to my ear. Bailey's soft breathing, the only sound in the room. Make me disappear. The words echoed louder than they should have. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe not. I knew too much, and for the first time I felt the weight of that knowledge pressing in from all sides. The next morning, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. No plates I recognized, no obvious reason to be there. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it wasn't. I didn't stare long enough to find out. Instead, I did what I always did when I needed clarity. I opened my laptop. The portal access was finally revoked. Too late, of course, but it made me laugh. They'd shut the barn doors after the horse had already galloped halfway across the prairie. Still, staring at the locked login page felt final. My chapter with them was closed, at least on paper. That afternoon, Carol called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. Miranda, please, you don't understand what it's like here right now. They're tearing each other apart. The CFO hasn't been seen in 2 days. The board is in emergency sessions. People are whispering about federal charges. Her voice cracked. It's terrifying. And they're looking for someone to blame. They're saying it's you. Of course they are, I said quietly. You should get a lawyer, or leave the city. Just be careful. Her words weren't dramatic. They were scared, and that scared me more than anything. That night, I packed a small bag. Not because I planned to run, but because something in my gut told me I needed to be ready. I'd lived my whole life meticulously organized, every detail accounted for. This was no different. Clothes, essentials, documents. And the envelope from HR, I finally opened it, not for the money, but because I wanted to see how little they valued me in print. It was insulting. 2 weeks' pay, a line about dedicated service, and a reminder that all company property should be returned. 15 years, reduced to 3 paragraphs and a signature. I slipped the check into the trash. The next day, headlines turned brutal. CFO resigns amid scandal. Federal investigators subpoena company records. And then, one that made me stop cold. Former senior executive believed to have knowledge of financial irregularities. Former senior executive. They didn't name me. Not yet. But I knew it was coming. I could almost feel the spotlight shifting, moving from the faceless company to the very real me. I walked Bailey through the park that afternoon, every sound sharper than usual. The crunch of gravel underfoot, the distant siren, the chatter of strangers. For the first time, I wondered if I'd pushed too far. Not because the truth didn't deserve to be seen, but because the people caught in its wake weren't just numbers on a report. They were people I'd worked beside, laughed with, maybe even trusted once. Back home, I sat at the table, staring at the empty wine glass in front of me. What had I gained? Not money, not recognition, just freedom, yes. But freedom comes with a cost. My phone buzzed again, a text this time from an unknown number. You think you're safe? You're not. Meet us tomorrow, 10 a.m. downtown. Or we'll tell our version of the story. I stared at the screen, pulse steady but low, like the hum before a storm. They wanted control. They always had. But I had already learned the truth about control. It's an illusion. Still, the message left me with one undeniable thought. This wasn't over. Not for me, not for them, and not for anyone who believed silence could bury the truth forever. The message sat on my phone like a weight. Meet us tomorrow, 10 a.m. downtown. Or we'll tell our version of the story I barely slept. Not out of fear, exactly, but out of calculation. I kept replaying the possibilities. Was it a bluff? A trap? Or just another attempt to scare me back into silence? By morning, my decision was made. I wasn't going to run, and I wasn't going to hide. At 9:45 a.m., I walked into the downtown cafe where they'd told me to come. It was busy enough to feel safe, but quiet enough for serious conversations. I ordered a black coffee, sat at a corner table, and waited. My palms were steady. 15 years of investor relations teaches you how to hide nerves behind calm eyes. 2 men walked in a few minutes later, suits too sharp to belong to regular businessmen. They spotted me instantly, slid into the booth across from me. One spoke first. Miranda Torres. You've made quite the mess, I didn't answer. Just sipped my coffee. Silence unnerves people quicker than anger. The other leaned forward. You know what happens next. The company will blame you. They'll push a story about a disgruntled ex-employee sabotaging systems. The press will eat it up. Unless... He paused, letting the word hang. Unless you cooperate. Tell us everything you have. Quietly. Off the record. Then maybe you walk away from this intact. I studied their faces. They weren't bluffing. They had power, money, reach. But they also underestimated me, just like everyone else. I don't have anything else, I said finally. The numbers spoke for themselves. Don't play games, the first one snapped. You kept records. We know you did. Ledger copies, emails. If you hand them over, we can control the damage. There it was again. That word. Control. The thing they clung to like a lifeline. I leaned forward, voice steady. Do you know what 15 years in that place taught me? That you can bury the truth for a while. You can dress it up, soften it, twist it. But eventually it breaks through. You want my files? I don't have to give them to you. Because every investor, every regulator, every journalist already has the only thing that matters: the truth. For a long moment, no one spoke. The clatter of dishes and hiss of the espresso machine filled the silence. The second man finally sat back, exhaling sharply through his nose. "You just made yourself a target," he said quietly. "Maybe," I answered. "Or maybe I just made myself free." They left soon after, frustrated, muttering under their breath. I didn't move until they were gone, my coffee cold in front of me. My heart was steady, calmer than it had any right to be. For once, I wasn't covering anyone else's lies. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer. Not because I was afraid of what they'd do, but because I knew I had to protect myself. We sat in his office for hours, drafting statements, preparing documents, making sure that if the company tried to smear my name, I could counter with evidence. Not revenge, not spin, just proof. Within days, the headlines shifted again. The CFO had officially resigned, effective immediately. Federal investigators had launched a probe. And the board? Half of them were suddenly retiring to spend more time with family. The euphemisms of downfall. As for me, the calls started to slow. The threats became whispers, then silence. My name never appeared in the press. Maybe because my lawyer had done his job. Maybe because the company knew they couldn't afford to fight me. Maybe because the truth was simply too loud to bury under one woman's reputation. One evening, I walked Bailey through the park at sunset. The air was cool, the sky streaked with orange and pink. For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders unclench. People around me laughed, jogged, carried groceries. Life, unaffected, kept moving. I thought back to that HR office, the envelope, the phrase, "Don't worry, we'll control the narrative." How certain they'd sounded, as if they were the authors of every story. But narratives are fragile things. They only hold if no one challenges them. I hadn't set out to destroy them. I hadn't set out to be a hero or a villain. All I had done was refuse to carry their lies anymore. I let the numbers stand naked in the light. And in the end, that was enough. The company would recover. Or maybe it wouldn't. People would lose jobs. New ones would be created. Another corporation would rise to take its place. That's the cycle. But something permanent had shifted in me. I no longer believed in the illusion of control. I believed in truth. And truth, once set free, doesn't need defending. It defends itself. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and let Bailey curl up beside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt no bitterness, no weight, no need to plan the next move. The story was over. And it wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine.